There is a version of this story that sounds impossible. A woman sits in a hospital bed, stripped of an immune system, waiting to find out if her sister's blood cells will save her life, and somewhere inside that waiting, she is still thinking about a broadcast desk 3,000 miles away and whether she will ever sit behind it again. She does not know yet that she will. She only knows that stopping was never really an option, not because she is fearless, but because somebody taught her a long time ago that stopping is not what you do when something hard arrives. You move through it. Her name is Robin Roberts, and for more than 3 decades she has been one of the most trusted faces in American morning television. Co-anchor of Good Morning America, a 2-time cancer survivor, a woman who has sat across from presidents and pop stars and grieving families and made every one of them feel like the only person in the room. But before any of that, before the studio lights and the Emmys and the Presidential Medal of Freedom, there was a little girl on the Mississippi coast who learned something no television contract could ever teach her. That showing up is the whole thing. She would need that lesson more than once, and each time, it would cost her more than the last. If her story moves you the way it's moved so many others, stay with it, because what happened to her is the kind of thing you don't forget. Robin Renee Roberts was born in 1960, but it was past Christian, Mississippi, a quiet coastal town that shaped her. Her father was one of the original Tuskegee Airmen, a man who flew combat missions for a country that had not yet decided he deserved full citizenship. Excellence in that house was not a goal, it was the entry fee. Her mother, Lucy Marion, carried a phrase that she repeated so often it became scripture in that household. Everybody's got something. Not as an excuse to give up, but as a way of understanding that pain is not a sign your life has gone wrong. It is simply a sign your life is real. Robin grew up the youngest of 4, an athlete before she was anything else, chasing basketballs and finish lines with the same intensity her father brought to the sky. By the time she reached Southeastern Louisiana University, she was playing basketball for the Lady Lions and learning, without knowing it yet, exactly what her career would eventually demand of her. How to perform when the pressure is at its absolute worst. Her first job in television was not glamorous. A small station in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, then Biloxi, then Nashville, then Atlanta. Each move wasn't a promotion so much as a test. A woman quietly proving she belonged in rooms that had not been built with her in mind. In 1988, ESPN brought her on as a sportscaster at a moment when the industry did not know what to do with a black woman who understood the game better than half the men calling it. She didn't wait for the industry to catch up. She simply became impossible to ignore. By 1995, ABC noticed. She joined Good Morning America as a contributor, and what started as an addition to the roster became, over the next decade, the center of it. In 2005, she was named co-anchor, and in 2012, something happened that no one could have scripted. Good Morning America finally broke the Today Show's 16-year winning streak. The broadcast Robin had helped build was now the most watched morning show in the country. She received that news on the very same day she received another piece of news entirely. One was about a record. The other was about her blood. What does it feel like when the greatest professional triumph of your life and the worst medical news of your life arrive in the very same breath? To understand that morning, you have to go back 5 years earlier, to a summer when Robin Roberts was 46 years old, at the peak of her career, and a routine mammogram came back with results that were anything but routine: breast cancer. And what she did next tells you everything about who she is. She didn't hide behind a publicist. She sat down at the same desk millions of Americans woke up to every single day, looked into the camera, and told the truth. She was scared. She said it plainly. But she also said that if she was scared, somebody watching was scared too, and maybe if they saw her fight, they would go get their own mammogram checked. She went through a lumpectomy, then radiation, managing her treatment around a live broadcast schedule with a discipline her colleagues found almost unbelievable. And the response from her audience was enormous. Letters poured in by the thousands. Women wrote to say they'd finally scheduled the appointment they'd been avoiding. She had taken the worst thing happening to her and turned it into something useful for someone else, because that was the lesson her mother had given her long before cancer ever entered the picture. Everybody's got something. The question was never whether hard things would come. The question was what you did with them. By the following year, she'd finished treatment and returned to that desk, not simply as a broadcaster anymore, but as someone who had lived through something real and come back anyway. She let herself believe, quietly, that the hardest chapter was behind her. She had no idea something else was already forming in her blood. Something that would ask far more of her than the first battle ever had. So there she was, in 2012, sitting with the greatest ratings victory of her career in one hand and a phone call from her doctors in the other. The chemotherapy that had saved her life 5 years earlier had carried a rare, documented risk: damage to the bone marrow. What her doctors found was myelodysplastic syndrome, a disease where the body's blood production begins to fail. She was 51, and the only cure was a bone marrow transplant, which meant leaving the air entirely, not managing treatment around a schedule this time, disappearing from it completely. Immunosuppression, isolation, a body deliberately broken down before it could be rebuilt. Once again, she told her own audience herself. And once again, something extraordinary happened. Donor registrations surged nationwide. But the match she needed wasn't a stranger. It was her own sister, Sally Ann, a broadcaster in her own right, who was tested and found to be compatible. She said yes without a second of hesitation. "She's my sister," she said later. There was nothing to decide. What her sister gave her that year wasn't just bone marrow. It was a continuation of her life. And Robin has never spoken about it since. Without her voice catching somewhere between gratitude and disbelief, she stepped away from Good Morning America in the fall of 2012. And what followed was nearly 6 months that were never televised. A body made fragile on purpose. An immune system reset to nothing. Days of physical difficulty that are almost impossible to describe from the outside. And in the middle of all of it, her mother died. Lucy Marion Roberts, the woman whose voice had built her entire moral compass, passed away while her youngest daughter was preparing for the most dangerous procedure of her life. There is no adequate language for that kind of timing. But her mother's voice traveled into that hospital room anyway, and it never left. What do you do with grief that arrives exactly when you have nothing left to give it? The transplant worked. 3 words that carry more weight than they look like they should. Because a bone marrow transplant is not a guarantee. It's a calculated wager against extraordinary odds. And Robin Roberts's body accepted her sister's marrow. It wasn't a straight line back. There were brutal days in that hospital room, days when the woman who had anchored the news through hurricanes and tragedies for 2 decades had nothing to do but wait and hope her body would hold. And then, on a February morning in 2013, she walked back into the Good Morning America studio. It remains one of the most watched moments in the show's history, not because anything extraordinary was said, but because of what the image itself said without words. A woman who had survived 2 cancers, a bone marrow transplant, and the death of her mother inside the same brutal season, sat down at that desk, looked into the camera, and said, "Good morning." Her colleagues wept. She didn't. She smiled. The specific smile of someone who knows exactly what it costs to be sitting in that chair and has no intention of wasting a second of it. She later put it into 6 words that would travel far beyond that broadcast. Make your mess your message. She hadn't invented the phrase, but she'd lived it with such completeness in front of millions of people that she gave it new weight. But the story doesn't end at that desk. Because surviving everything changed the way she chose to live everything that came after. In December of that same year, she came out publicly, not with a press conference, but quietly, in a note of gratitude naming her partner of 10 years, the woman who had been there through every diagnosis, every hospital room, every impossible day. She hadn't hidden that relationship out of shame. She had simply kept it private the way she kept everything private, until sharing it could serve a purpose bigger than herself. Their relationship kept deepening. And then, years later, her partner received her own diagnosis: breast cancer. The woman who had once cared for Robin through 2 battles was now facing her own, and Robin did not leave the room. She showed up with the specific competence of someone who understood exactly what that road required, because she had walked it herself. Her partner recovered. And years after that, the two of them were married in a quiet ceremony surrounded by the people who had carried them through everything.